The poster was taped to a glass door outside a coffee shop in Columbus, Ohio. I'd stopped to check my phone before a client meeting, and there I was. Same square jaw, same slight asymmetry in the eyebrows, same birthmark near the left ear. The name underneath read, Michael Chen, last seen August 1993. The photograph showed a boy, maybe 7 or 8, smiling at a birthday party. I would have been that age then. I stood very still while a woman pushed past me with a stroller. The poster was weathered, the edges curled. Someone had kept this search alive for 3 decades. I pulled out my phone and photographed it, then called the number printed at the bottom. A woman answered on the second ring. "This is Helen Chen." I found I could not speak immediately. "Hello?" she said. "I'm calling about the poster, the missing person." There was a long silence on her end, then a sharp intake of breath. "Where did you see it?" I told her the address. She asked me to describe the poster, every detail, her voice climbing in pitch. When I finished, she said something that made the sidewalk feel unstable beneath my feet. "That's my brother. Are you calling because you've seen him?" I stood outside that coffee shop for another 20 minutes after we hung up. She had insisted on sending me a photograph, a more recent age progression image created by some specialist. It arrived while I waited. The face looking back from my screen could have been my driver's license photo. I deleted it immediately, then restored it from the deleted folder. My hands were steady the entire time, a fact I noticed with some distant part of my mind. By the time I walked to my meeting, I had decided on patience. This kind of confusion required methodical steps. My name is David Porter. I design commercial buildings for a firm in Philadelphia, where I have lived since graduate school. I am methodical by training and temperament. My wife died 4 years ago, an aneurysm that gave no warning. Since then, I have kept a clean house, prepared my meals on Sundays for the week ahead, and maintained the routines that give structure to solitude. My daughter lives in Seattle, works in tech, calls twice a week. These facts about myself felt suddenly unreliable, like items on a list I had memorized but never verified. The Columbus meeting went smoothly. I presented renderings for a mixed-use development, answered questions about load-bearing specifications and parking flow, shook hands with men in expensive suits. I flew home that evening. The entire time, the phone in my pocket contained that photograph and the number for a woman who believed I was someone else. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my birth certificate, my passport, my social security card. The documents formed a neat stack. Each one confirmed I was David Michael Porter, born April 12, 1977, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. My parents, Robert and Jean Porter, both deceased now, had raised me in a quiet neighborhood where I learned to ride a bicycle and later to drive a car. I'd called them Mom and Dad. They had attended my college graduation, walked beside me at my wedding, held my daughter when she was hours old. I placed the documents back in their folder and made myself a cup of tea. The water boiled, the kettle clicked off, I poured slowly and added nothing. The taste was faintly bitter. I drank it all. The next morning I called the number from the poster again. Helen Chen answered as if she had been waiting. I told her my name, my age, my birth date. The silence that followed had weight. "That's his birthday," she said finally. "April 12th, Michael would be 48. "I need to understand something," I said. "Do you have documentation? Hospital records, photographs, anything that would help establish who this child was?" She did. She told me she would send everything, that she had kept it all these years. She asked if we could meet. I suggested a neutral location, a public library in Harrisburg, halfway between her home in Ohio and mine in Philadelphia. She agreed immediately, her voice breaking with something I recognized as hope. I did not share that feeling, but I understood it. The files arrived 2 days later, a thick envelope sent overnight. I opened it at my dining table with a letter opener that had belonged to my father. Inside were photocopies of a birth certificate, hospital bracelets, school photographs, a missing person report filed with the Pittsburgh police in August 1993. The child in the photographs had my face at different ages. The birth certificate listed parents named Thomas and Helen Chen. The address was in Pittsburgh, a neighborhood I had never visited. I spread the documents across the table and studied them with the same focus I brought to structural plans. The Pittsburgh police report described a boy who had been with his father at a playground and had vanished while the father spoke to another adult. Witnesses were vague. The father, Thomas Chen, had died in 2003. Helen Chen had continued the search alone. There were school records showing Michael Chen enrolled in second grade, then absent after August. There were letters Helen had written to various agencies over the years, appeals for help, for attention, for someone to keep looking. I read all of it. Then I pulled out my own childhood photographs. My parents had kept albums, careful records of birthday parties and holidays. I appeared in them consistently, a small boy who grew taller in increments. But now I noticed gaps. There were no baby photographs. The earliest image showed me at what looked like 4 or 5, standing in front of a house I recognized as my childhood home. My mother held my hand. Both of them smiled at the camera. I had never questioned the absence of earlier pictures. Some families were not diligent about photography. Some moved and lost things. I made a list of questions on a yellow legal pad. Where had I been born exactly, and at which hospital? Why were there no medical records from my first years? Who had been present at my birth? I underlined this last question twice. The county records office in Lancaster was a low building with narrow windows. I went on a Thursday morning and requested my birth certificate, the original if possible. The clerk was a young man with careful hands. He searched the system, frowned, searched again. After 20 minutes, he told me there was a notation on the file, something about amended records. He could not provide details without a court order. I thanked him and left. That afternoon, I hired a private investigator, a woman named Carla James, who came recommended by an attorney I knew. She was perhaps 60, dressed in a plain jacket, and she listened without interrupting as I explained the situation. When I finished, she asked to see the documents. She examined each one, taking her time. "This happens," she said. "Not often, but it happens. False adoptions, identity substitution. Sometimes it's well-meaning, sometimes not. We'll need to verify everything." I asked how long it would take. She told me it depended on what we found, but she would start with the hospital records and the court archives. I gave her a retainer check. She folded it into her wallet and said she would call within the week. Helen Chen and I met on a Saturday morning. The library was nearly empty, and she was waiting at a table near the windows. She stood when she saw me, her hand going to her mouth. She was perhaps 55, with graying hair pulled back and eyes that had known prolonged grief. "You look like him," she said. "You look exactly like him." We sat. I'd brought my own photographs, the ones from my childhood. She studied them with her head tilted, touching the edges carefully. Then she pulled out a photograph of her own, a boy at a beach holding a shovel. The face was mine, younger, the expression bright with some forgotten happiness. "This was the summer before," she said. "He loved the ocean." I asked her to tell me about Michael. She spoke for half an hour, describing a boy who had been curious and careful, who had lined up his toys in rows and asked questions about how things worked. She talked about his father, how the disappearance had broken him, how he had searched until illness took him. She spoke with the precision of someone who had told this story many times to police and journalists and anyone who might listen. When she finished, I told her about David Porter, about a childhood that felt complete, a family that had seemed ordinary, a life that had always fit. I told her about the gaps I was now noticing, the absence of early records, the amended birth certificate I could not access. "They took him," she said. Her voice was quiet, factual. "Someone took my brother and gave him a different life." I did not argue. The evidence was arranging itself into a pattern I could not ignore. Carla called on a Tuesday. She had found the hospital records from Lancaster, and there was no birth registered for David Michael Porter on April 12, 1977. She had found something else, though, an adoption finalized in 1981, sealed by court order, listing Robert and Jean Porter as adoptive parents. The child's original name had been redacted, but the birth date matched. "Your parents adopted you when you were 4, she said, "legally through the state system, but the origin documents are sealed, which is unusual for that era unless there were extenuating circumstances." I asked what that meant. She said it could mean the biological parents' rights were terminated due to unfitness, or that the adoption involved protective custody, Or it could mean someone had arranged it quietly, outside normal channels, and filed the paperwork to make it legitimate afterward. I need the sealed records, I said. That requires a judge's order. I can file a petition, but it will take time. I told her to proceed. Then I sat in my office and thought about my parents, both dead now, both beyond questions. My father had been an accountant, precise and kind. My mother had taught elementary school and made elaborate holiday meals. They had never mentioned adoption. I had never suspected it. That night I went through old boxes in my basement, containers I had moved from my parents' house after they died. Most held tax records, old bills, photograph albums I had already reviewed. But in one box I found a folder labeled simply David. Inside were documents I had never seen, a court order finalizing adoption, a name change petition. And beneath those, a single photograph of a woman I did not recognize, holding a small boy. The back of the photograph was blank. I scanned everything and sent it to Carla. Her response came the next morning. The woman in the photograph matched a driver's license photo from 1980, Pennsylvania records, name Linda Marsh. The same name appeared in the adoption file as a caseworker who had facilitated the placement. Carla had found an address, a phone number no longer in service. She was still searching. I called Helen and told her what I had learned. She was silent for a long time. "Will you take a DNA test?" she asked. I told her I would. We arranged it through a service Carla recommended, one that expedited results. I went to a clinic, let them swab my cheek, signed the forms. Helen did the same in Ohio. We both waited. The results arrived in 10 days. The probability of sibling relationship was 99.7%. I read the number 3 times, sitting in my parked car outside my office. Then I called Helen. "We're related," I said. She wept. I listened to her cry for several minutes, saying nothing because there was nothing to say that would be adequate. When she quieted, I told her I would find out what had happened, how this had been done. She asked me what I needed. I told her I needed time and patience. She said she had waited 32 years. She could wait longer. Carla found Linda Marsh 2 weeks later, living in a care facility outside Harrisburg. She was 83, suffering from dementia, according to the facility director. Carla had spoken to her briefly, but the conversation had not been coherent. I asked if I could visit. Carla said she would arrange it, but I should prepare for the possibility of learning nothing. I drove there on a gray morning in late autumn. The facility was clean and quiet, the hallways painted in soft colors. Linda Marsh sat in a common room, a small woman with white hair and hands that moved restlessly in her lap. I introduced myself, using the name David Porter. Her eyes moved to my face and stayed there. "I know you," she said. I sat across from her. "I'm trying to understand something about my past. You helped my parents adopt me in 1981. She nodded slowly. "The boy. You were the boy. Can you tell me where I came from, who my biological parents were?" Her expression shifted, something like fear or confusion crossing it. "They said it was safe. They promised he would be safe." "Who promised?" "The father. He was so frightened. He said people were looking, that they would hurt the boy. He asked me to help. I shouldn't have, but he was so desperate. I felt something cold settle in my chest." "What was his name?" "Thomas," she said. "Thomas Chen." The room seemed to pause. I could hear a television playing somewhere distant, the murmur of other conversations. "He brought you to me," she continued, her voice wavering. "He said your mother didn't know, that it had to be secret. He said you needed a new family, a new name. He paid me. I arranged it with the Porters. They were good people. They wanted a child." "He kidnapped his own son?" I asked. She blinked at me, her confusion deepening. "He was protecting you. That's what he said. Protection." I stayed with her for another hour, asking questions gently, repeating myself when she lost the thread. The story emerged in fragments. Thomas Chen had brought me to her in August 1993, claiming that his estranged wife's family was dangerous, that they would take me or harm me. He had paid Linda Marsh to place me with a family through unofficial channels, to create paperwork that would make it legal after the fact. The Porters had been told I was from a troubled situation, that the adoption needed to be quiet for my safety. They had believed they were rescuing a child. Perhaps they had been. Linda Marsh grew tired. A nurse came and said visiting hours were ending. I thanked Linda, though I was not sure she understood. As I stood to leave, she caught my hand. "You turned out well," she said. "I hoped you would." I drove home slowly, the highway blurring in front of me. My father, Thomas Chen, the man I had never met, had taken me from my mother and sister and erased my identity. He had done it believing it was necessary. He had been wrong or lying or deluded. The result was the same. A family destroyed, a woman who had spent decades searching, a life built on concealed truth. At home, I called Helen. I told her everything Linda Marsh had said. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence. "He told me he turned around and you were gone," she said finally. "He told the police someone must have taken you. He cried. I watched him cry for years." "I'm sorry," I said. "It wasn't your fault. You were a child." "I know, but I'm still sorry." We talked about next steps. She wanted to report it to the police, to have Thomas Chen's actions formally documented, even though he was long dead. I told her I would support whatever she decided. She asked if I wanted to meet her in person to spend time as family. I said yes, though I did not know what that would look like. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the photograph of the woman holding the boy. I'd thought she was a stranger. Now I knew she was my mother, Helen's mother, a woman who had believed her son was stolen by a stranger. I had been within reach all this time, living 3 hours away under a different name, building a life with people who loved me, but who had been complicit, however unintentionally, in my disappearance. The legal process unfolded over months. Carla compiled evidence. Helen filed reports with the police. The case was reviewed and documented, though no charges could be filed against the dead. The records were amended to reflect the truth. My birth certificate was corrected, showing my original name, though I chose to keep the name Porter. It had been mine longer than Chen had been. I met Helen's extended family, cousins and aunts who welcomed me cautiously, unsure how to integrate a ghost into their lives. I attended dinners and holidays, learning their rhythms, their stories, their ways of being. It felt like learning a language late in life, functional but never quite native. They were kind. I was grateful. My daughter flew in from Seattle when I told her. She listened to the story with her lawyer's focus, asking clarifying questions, making sure I was all right. When I finished, she hugged me and said it did not change anything between us. I believed her. She met Helen, and they spoke for hours, finding some common ground I could not quite access. What I learned was this: my father, Thomas Chen, had been involved in something I would never fully understand. Whether it was genuine danger or paranoia or something else, he had made a choice that fractured lives. The Porters, my adoptive parents, had perhaps suspected something was irregular, but had chosen to believe they were doing good. Linda Marsh had bent rules for money and perhaps for mercy. Everyone involved had made decisions that seemed justified at the time. I do not forgive any of them. I also do not entirely condemn them. Forgiveness and condemnation both require a certainty I do not possess. What I have now is clarity. I know who I was and who I became. I carry both names, both histories. I visit Helen when I can, and we sit together in comfortable quiet, two people who share blood and loss and the strange gift of rediscovery. She has stopped searching, the posters finally taken down. I have stopped searching too, for different reasons. On my desk at home, I keep 2 photographs. One shows a boy named Michael Chen at a beach, holding a shovel, smiling at something beyond the frame. The other shows a man named David Porter at his daughter's college graduation, his arm around her shoulders, both of them squinting in the bright sun. They are the same person. They are also not. I learned that identity is both fragile and resilient. It can be taken, rewritten, and rediscovered. It bends under pressure but does not always break. What remains is the self that observes all of it, the quiet voice that persists through every name and every story, asking questions and seeking truth. I am still asking. I will not stop.